So our guest today is an old friend and one of those kind of guys in my life. You should all be so lucky where you don't see him for a long time, and then you see him or you call him, and it's just like you never let off the phone call. You just keep going, and it's been that like that for I want to say 45 years, something like that's crazy. So Doug Yeo is former, now retired bass trombonist from Boston Symphony Orchestra, professor of trombone at Arizona State, and now he's at our alma mater, our shared alma mater, Wheaton College in suburban Chicago, teaching trombone. And so, Doug, what we do here generally is we love to hear about the life of the artist and kind of what the struggles have been and the U-turns and the weird jobs and all the rest of it. The group this year have, I don't know, 8 or 10 that are graduating and facing a future that's made more uncertain by the pandemic. And there's always angst with graduation anyhow. This year more than 100 years, probably. So let's hear about it from the top, from when you first were born and growing up on Long Island and all the rest of it.
Well, first of all, thanks to you, Professor Salzman, my friend for over 45 years. That's crazy because you don't get many 45-year periods in a lifetime. And so when you have a friend that's goes back that far, it's a really treasured thing. I'm sure you have all had relationships in your young lives that have already ended. You started it had great promise, and then it was done. And that's how things go. People move on, they go do other things. But Tim Salzman and I go way back. We shared a lot of things at Wheaton College. We came from very different parts of the world. Our families were very different people. But we started to know each other because he played the tuba and I played the bass trombone. And then I found out that he played the piano, and he was a lot better than he'll ever admit that he was. And he played some very tough repertoire on my senior recital. He also played in sort of a soft rock band with Marty O'Donnell and a bunch of other guys. They patterned themselves after Gentle Giant, which I think was one of the actually great rock bands of the 70s. It's kind of been forgotten today, but they combined classical music and rock forms, and Tim was a smoking keyboard player. So I came to Wheaton College uh, through a rather circuitous route. I think it was Woody Allen that said in his opening line in his movie Take the Money and Run, I think he said, "I was born at a very early age." And so I guess I was too. All of us were. I was born in California. My dad was in the Army just after the Korean War uh, ceasefire. But only a few months after that, my dad was discharged. We took the train across country and settled in Queens, New York, where my dad went into business in New York City uh, alongside his father, who was working in the same company. When I was 5 years old and my younger brother had been born, we moved to Long Island, just across the Brooklyn line to Valley Stream, New York, which is where I grew up until I was 16. I started playing the trombone when I was 9. I tell people I didn't choose the trombone chose me. It was a pretty typical thing. When I was in fourth grade, I got a chance to pick an instrument, and back then schools had instruments that you could borrow, and I chose the trumpet like all of my other friends who were guys. All the girls chose flute. Nobody had yet discovered the saxophone. Um, so for better or for worse, that's just the way it was. But by the time the band director got around to people whose last name began with Y, there were no more trumpets. So I was unceremoniously given a trombone. Um, Came home pretty unhappy and looked in the dictionary to figure out how to put it together. Uh, there must be some trombone players in this group of 41 people. So, but it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know the trombone only has 3 parts: a bell, a slide, and a mouthpiece. There's a limited number of ways you can put it together, but I managed to put it together backwards because the photograph of a trombone in the dictionary was printed backwards. So I played left-handed for 2 years, which tells you something about my band director. Um,
Is
then I
is
got,
that true? I have never heard you
yeah,
say that. Is that true? Oh
yeah.
my gosh. Wow.
And then we got a new band director, and on the first day of school, he said, "What are you doing?" And so I had to relearn it. So, but anyway, I was pretty unhappy. But after I played my first note, and I think my mother screamed or something, and I thought, well, I've got power. I was just a skinny little kid. I had no power. I had no superpowers. I had no great academic powers. I had no sports prowess. I didn't know what a girl was. But so the trombone was my ticket. And so when I was 16, my dad changed jobs. He moved from the corporate life in New Jersey. When he was 40 years old, decided he wanted to become a minister, which was a freak out for me because at the time I didn't share whatever faith that he was interested in. That came later. And so we moved from New York City area where there was just so many wonderful opportunities and a great wind ensemble in my high school, which was much more important than the orchestra. The wind ensemble was the group. Had a really gifted band director. Um, I know Professor Salzman will appreciate this. I remember in 1970 going to hear William Ravelli's last concert with the University of Michigan Band, and it was at Carnegie Hall.
Wow.
And I remember that really, really vividly. Maybe it was 71, I think it was.
Mm.
And I remember they opened the concert with Shostakovich Festive Overture and the Hunsberger transcription, and the clarinet solo at the beginning was played by a guy named Dennis Zeisler,
Oh yeah.
who just died
Yes.
just a few weeks ago. Uh,
Yes.
Denny had been principal clarinet in the wind ensemble at my high school.
Is that right?
Yeah, and he had graduated just a few years before we went to that concert. And so we were all so proud, from Hewlett High School, one of our own, first clarinet, Ravelli, University of Michigan, we're at Carnegie Hall. We're just freaking out. It was great.
Wow.
So we moved to New Jersey to a really awful, awful place in the middle of nowhere. Kind of like the place where Tim Salzman grew up, farms everywhere, and like no kind of I don't want to say no culture because there was lots of culture. There just wasn't the culture that I was used to. And I think we have to be careful about that we don't get so elitist that we think that there's only one kind of culture. I can say as an aside, when I decided to move, my wife and I decided to move to Arizona after I retired from the Boston Symphony. So many of my colleagues and friends said, "Doug, you're crazy. There's no culture there." Well, I remember something that my mentor, Professor Salzman's mentor as well, Harold Best, who was the dean of the Conservatory of Music at Wheaton College when we were students there. When he retired from Wheaton, he moved to Harrison, Idaho. So, you know, Western Idaho, near Coeur d'Alene, way up in the mountains. Took a half hour to get from his house to any civilization. And that was just a little, grocery store. And people said to him, "Harold, why in the world are you moving to Harrison, Idaho? There is no culture there." And he said, "Oh yeah, there is. It's just a different culture." And he was interested in the culture of the, hardworking lumbermen, timber workers, farmers working up in altitude, people that were working with livestock in the winter. Here's a guy who was president of the National Association of Schools of Music, gifted composer, author, mentor, and he wanted something different. And that's what I wanted different when I moved to Arizona. I wanted out of the East Coast. I wanted out of the centers of power. Growing up in New York City, having my career in Boston, having gone to undergraduate school at Wheaton College in Chicago and then graduate school at New York University, I wanted away from that. And we went to Arizona. And Arizona was a really unbelievably great place for us. And I learned a lot. It's one of the most diverse places I'd ever been. Had a tremendous amount of culture. Phoenix is the eighth largest city in the country, but it's got a part-time symphony orchestra. It's actually a larger city than Philadelphia, but no one thinks of the Phoenix Symphony in the same breath as the Philadelphia Orchestra. Certainly, we went to lots of Phoenix Symphony concerts, and I even played with them, substituting. I didn't really like to substitute. They called me when I moved there and said, "Do you want to sub?" I said, "Actually, no. Call my students at ASU. I don't need to sub in the Phoenix Symphony or any orchestra. Give the work to people who need it." But I said, if you have an emergency, I'll come down. So, at 1 o'clock on December 22nd, and there was a 2 o'clock performance of the Nutcracker, and the third trombone player called in sick. Well, okay, I was there. But I learned a lot about culture in Arizona, particularly Native American culture, Mexican American culture. Um, I learned a lot. It was a really very open, inviting. Uh, you can't read what you can't believe everything you read in the papers. I'm sure all of you know that by now. I found Arizona. We lived on the west side in Goodyear, in the foothills of the Estrella Mountains. I found it to be the least racist place I ever lived in my life. Uh, More interracial marriages, more general acceptance of just who you are. Nobody ever began a conversation with me with the words, "So where'd you go to school?" Or, "What do you do?" I think for some of my friends, they never knew that I played in the Boston Symphony because they never asked me. And that wasn't critical for them to know, for me to volunteer for the health of our relationship because we talked about other things. So that was that. So anyway, we moved to New Jersey. It was a very different kind of place for me, but two great things happened. Um, I met a girl who in August will be married 45 years, which in and itself is, I think, the most remarkable thing that ever happened to me in my life, except for the other thing, which was then uh, I really came to know God, and that was the most important thing, and that changed my life in incalculable ways. So I had talent. I was not born with a mouthpiece in my mouth. I worked hard. I hit my ceiling by the time I got to the end of high school. My ceiling was pretty high. It was good. My ceiling was high enough to get me to, first trombone in New Jersey All State and get into the Northeastern, what was it, All Eastern Orchestra, and also the McDonald's All American Marching Band, which was a thing back then. They took two kids from every state and put us together to play at the Rose Bowl parade and then at the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade in New York. Tim, you'll appreciate this, that the marching director was Al Wright from Purdue. Not the kindest man I ever met in my life, but he was the guy, and so that was a thrill to get off an airplane in Los Angeles. Somebody else had paid for me to go to the Rose Bowl parade. I had never seen a palm tree before, except on Hawaii 5-0. And so that was, and I began to realize that trombone could take me places. I didn't know what it meant to be a trombone major in college. I didn't know what it meant to be a trombonist as a vocation. I just knew that the only thing that I had any particular talent at was playing the trombone. And when I was in the All Eastern Orchestra, which ironically was held in Boston, they took sort of the top high school players from the northeastern states, from Maryland North, and it was a every other year festival. And which, as another aside, I was very blessed that many years later, my oldest daughter Linda, who plays bass trombone, lives here in Wheaton with our grandkids. Um, she played in All Eastern Orchestra in Baltimore, which she sat in my old chair when I used to play in the Baltimore Symphony. And then our other daughter Robin was a trumpet major. Now director of public relations for San Francisco Symphony, and she got an All Eastern Orchestra, played at Carnegie Hall, where I played over 100 concerts. So it's just interesting the connections that happen in one's life. So um, it was at All Eastern Orchestra. It was conducted by Keith Brown, who was a trombone professor at Indiana University in Bloomington, and also a conductor. Has conducted at Temple University. And he heard me and came up to me at a break and said, "Where are you going to college, young man?" And I said, "Well, hadn't figured it out." This was January. I hadn't figured it out yet. So this was a different time. This was not the time of today where, as an undergrad, as a high school senior, you apply to 10 schools, 4 safety schools and 6 schools you really want to get into, but you either can't afford or you're not smart enough for it, but you want to hope that something could happen. And so I hadn't really thought it through, and so I applied to IU. I did not get a scholarship, but my natural talent really took me there. And so as a freshman, IU has 5 orchestras and 3 bands. I got in the 4th orchestra first semester, and my second semester I got in the top orchestra. And that was kind of unusual for a freshman. And so I wasn't really full of myself, if I can be honest about it. I was just enjoying the ride. I thought it was just great. Like, wow, I was with all these other great players. But then there was this girl and she was going to Wheaton College. And so there was no question. Before I even started at IU, I knew I was going to be transferring to Wheaton because I had to be near this girl. Turned out okay after 45 years of marriage now. So no complaints. But I also saw the opportunity, a hoped for opportunity, that moving to Chicago, I might be able to study with Edward Kleinhammer, who was the bass trombonist of the Chicago Symphony, which ultimately did happen just a few weeks after I got to Wheaton. So it was really the meeting with Mr. Kleinhammer that was the life-changing moment for me there at Wheaton College. Here's a man that was respected as one of the greatest bass trombone exponents as an orchestral player, maybe in the history of the instrument. He'd written the seminal book about the trombone, The Art of Trombone Playing. He did not teach at a college. He took just individual lessons from people. I was the only student at the time that he saw every week. I would go downtown Chicago every week to take my lesson. And so he was never officially an adjunct at Wheaton. We had a program with an acronym, PLO. It was private lessons outside before PLO meant something else. So I remember my first lesson with Mr. Kleinhammer. So here I was. I had very high ceiling. My natural talent took me really far. I was not a great practicer. Maybe practiced, a couple hours a day. I did a lot of playing, not a lot of practicing. There's a big difference between the two. Maybe I practiced a couple hours. Did a lot of farting around, playing duets with people, and just, playing in the ensembles and things like that. Great. But I remember my first lesson with Mr. Kleinhammer. Mr. Brown's pedagogy was pretty much the kind where he said he would assign me 5 etudes every week, and I'd come into the lesson, I'd play all 5, and he'd check them off, and he'd assign me 5 more. And a lot of them were technical. Most of them were technical. And I developed a really, really good technique. But there wasn't a lot of direction. He was happy to let my talent sort of take me, and I think he saw a potential 4-year plan there, but the freshman plan was, let's just see what this kid can do. So I got to my first lesson with Mr. Kleinhammer, and I'll never forget this with so many things with him. I played an etude, and he said, well, play something else. Played another etude. He said, play something else. I say 3 or 4 etudes, and I'm starting to wonder what he's thinking. And then he looked at me with just a very kind but penetrating look, and he said, so what did you think about that? I looked at him and said, sounded pretty good. And then he looked at me, took his glasses, and he went, really? And then he tore it apart. I should say what it was that he tore apart was after I'd done all those etudes, he asked me to play a B-flat scale. I thought he'd lost his mind. And so I went, and he said, no, I want a 1 octave B-flat scale, half notes, repeat the top B-flat and come back down. And I played it. And he said, what'd you think of that? And I said, thought it was okay, pretty good. He said, really? And then he took it apart. He took every note apart. He said, okay, did you hear the articulation of the first note? Okay, there was a little burr on it. And then the second note, in the middle of the note, the pitch dropped just a little bit before it came back up, and it went higher, and then it finally settled. And the third note, did you hear that release? And by the way, your 4th position was really sharp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody had ever told me anything like that. And I thought, here I am. I'm coming from Indiana University. I just played Wozzeck as a freshman. It was just an amazing, heady experience with, 53 trombone players on campus. This was a crazy time. And so I came here, and here this man is telling me something about each note that I had no idea. I had missed it all. I just thought it was pretty good. But he was not the kind of guy, and you all know them. There are these teachers around that, they scream and yell and throw furniture, and they put you down, in order to make themselves feel good. And so that's like the worst kind of teacher you could ever have, who needs to beat up on students in order to help their own self-image. So, if you ever have a teacher like that, you need to find another one. So he was not that kind. He was the kind of guy who was the rarest person in the whole world, and I hope all of you have people like this. The rarest person in your life is a person who loves you enough to tell you things you don't want to hear, and then will help you fix it. That's the rarest person. I have one of those in my wife, and I have one of those in Ed Kleinhammer. And that's a really rare thing. So he would never say something to me or be critical of my playing without helping me. And so we spent that first quarter, we were on a quarter system back then. We spent that first quarter working on sort of just fundamentals, just, slowly working through production and backing me up from that precocious technique that I had developed and that natural talent, because I realized I had hit the ceiling. And if I was going to get past the ceiling, it was now going to be no more natural talent. It was going to be all hard work. And so he told me what it was that I needed to do. It didn't hurt that every week my wife and I went downtown and heard him play in the Chicago Symphony. So that was the best wedding present we got. I got it from my grandmother. She gave us a subscription to the Chicago Symphony. And so we were there way, way up high at the last row of the nosebleeds. But we were there. We were in the building. We were in the room. And I got to see my teacher play every week. And so I would just stare at him until I could see my head on his shoulders. I didn't know what it meant to get there yet. He was beginning to show me what that was and how important all the little things were, that it wasn't enough just to be a talented player. So big deal. You were first trombone in New Jersey All-State. You know how many guys are first trombone in their All-State orchestras? Not enough that I was, I played Wozzeck as a freshman at IU. You know how many players go through IU and are really great players? So, yeah, it's true. We're all special, but so is everybody else. You're special. I'm special. But everybody else is special too. So, he was not a participation trophy kind of guy. He was just going to, he was a truth teller. He wasn't going to blow smoke, but he wanted to help me. And I was really, really blessed by that, by the fact that he was willing to help me. And so I learned a lot, and I began working on orchestral repertoire, and my wife graduated. I graduated from Wheaton. It's kind of a long story, but because my wife and I were 1 year apart in school, when I was a freshman, she was a senior. Her plan always was to go to Wheaton for 2 years and then transfer to Columbia University to the nursing school, because Wheaton didn't have a nursing school. Again, it was a different time. Oh, I just assume I'm going to go to Wheaton for 2 years and I'm going to transfer to Columbia. Of course. We don't think that way today, but that's just the way we thought. And so the problem was that after her 2 years at Wheaton, I would have just finished my junior year. If we were going to get married, we had to figure out a way to get on a similar schedule. So the way to do that was for me to go year round for 3 years of college. So a year at IU, summer at Wheaton, a year at Wheaton, a summer at Wheaton, a year at Wheaton, and I was done in 3 years. So I graduated basically a year ahead of my class. I should have been in Professor Salzman's class of 77. I ended up in the class of 76. But it meant that we could both leave Wheaton at the same time, and we moved to New York City because that's where Columbia was. And so here's where the story gets maybe a little more interesting and a little more real. So I had studied with Ed Kleinheimer. I was playing better than I ever had. Not as good as I would get, but better than I ever had. Moved to New York. I went downtown. I joined the union, the musicians union, and then sat at the telephone waiting for it to ring. And after a month of the phone not ringing, you got to remember that there were, 150 bass trombone players in the musicians union in New York City, and my last name began with Y, another disadvantage. So one day, my wife, who's in nursing school, said, "Doug, we don't have any money. You need to get a job today." And so I said, okay. I was never too proud to work. At Wheaton, I worked a lot of part-time jobs. It was a different time. My parents contributed very little money to my education, especially after I was married. And so I had to work to put myself through school. Okay, tuition was $3,000 a year back then, but it was still a lot of money to us who had to work a lot of part-time jobs to make it together. So I worked as a student. I worked 2 shifts a week at the White Hen Pantry, which is now a 7-Eleven down by the Wheaton train station. I worked as student manager of the College Artist Series, putting up posters all around Chicago for concerts with the Swedish Radio Choir and Vladimir Ashkenazy and Alicia De La Rocha piano and, or different Boston Symphony. First time I ever heard the Boston Symphony was on the Wheaton College Artist Series. Amazing. And I taught trombone lessons to high school kids who were only a few years younger than me in the Wheaton College Prep Department. And I shoveled snow for an office park. Whenever it snowed, they'd send a van around to pick up students, put a shovel in my hand. I'd shovel for 4 hours, and they'd pay me $5 an hour, and that was it. And so I could cobble together all these different kind of part-time jobs. None of them had anything to do with the trombone. I mean, I never made a penny as a freelancer when I lived in Chicago, not one penny. But I wasn't too proud to work because we had to work. And so when I got to NYC, then I had to get a job. Went down to the corner store, got a New York Times course, and answered an ad. And I worked as a secretary full time for 3 years, 9 to 5. Took the subway, took the A train, literally. Take the A train. That's where I did from Washington Heights in Manhattan, 668th Street, downtown, working a whole lot of different jobs. I worked for the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, National Human Rights Organization. Um, the other people in the office used to kid me that I was the only goy, the only non-Jew working in the place except for the cleaning help. This is what they told me. And so they had a lot of fun joking with me about, oh, who let the goyim in? Here we are. So, but I had grown up in a Jewish neighborhood. I knew more Yiddish than I did the Spanish that I had studied my whole high school career. That was the one class I flunked. So I took Spanish for 3 years to get 2 years credit. But I did know my numbers really well, though, after that. So I got a job as a secretary. I worked for the ADL. I worked in the law school at New York University and decided to get a master's degree at NYU. So that helped because I got some tuition remission, some money back. I worked for two guys who were headhunters in the pharmaceutical business. They never met with anyone. They did it all by fax and phone, and they were millionaires. And they paid me $10 an hour, and that was real money. I was really happy to get that. And so I did do a little freelancing in New York, but it was not a living. I was really glad for the freelancing that I had. It was mostly Broadway shows, subs. I played The King and I with Yul Brynner, more performances than I can even remember. I played in the Goldman Band, probably the greatest professional concert band in all history, founded by Edwin Franco Goldman. And I was in it with his son, Richard Franco Goldman, who was already pretty elderly at the time. He died during my 4-year tenure there. But oh my goodness, the Goldman Band, we did 6 concerts a week, 5 in the band shell next to the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and 1 at Seaside Park across from Coney Island in Brooklyn. Goldman Band, this was real. This was money. This was real money. This was a rare summer job that you could get in music. And I auditioned for that, got the job, and sat in a band where one of the euphonium players was Abe Pearlstein. Name probably doesn't mean a thing to anybody today, but Abe Pearlstein, at the age of 18, won the second trombone job at the NBC Symphony with Toscanini. In the same week, he won the second trombone job in the New York Philharmonic. And he had to choose. And he chose NBC because it was the better work.
Wow.
Yeah. And so he was playing euphonium. And then on tuba was a guy with a bell front recording bass. And I thought, who's this guy playing a recording bass? You know, I thought, wait a minute, where's that Arnold Jacobs big York?
Right.
Yeah, but this tuba player was Bill Barber, who played with Miles Davis on the Birth of the Cool sessions. It's one of the great commercial tuba players of all time. And could play anything. And that guy, he played Carnival of Venice once with us. I mean, it was just astounding. Jimmy Burke, the great cornet soloist, who had only one arm. He didn't have a left arm. And Jimmy was not playing by that time, but he was conducting the band, which was, he was just such a great guy. First of all, great musician, you know, grew up in the era of Herbert Clark. And he had a way of conducting. Of course, he only had one arm, so he had a way of conducting. And he'd get ready to turn a page. He'd throw the baton on his teeth, and then he'd reach down and turn the page, and then grab the baton out. It was all one smooth motion. It was just amazing. And Jimmy, one day we had a rehearsal, and he just dropped dead on the podium. And that was it. He was just gone. And everyone just said, but this is how Jimmy would have wanted to go.
Yeah.
So that was that. I did a lot of big bands. I played in Jerry Mulligan Band. I played in the Dave Chesky Band. I played in some reggae bands. Did a lot of different kinds of musics. I'm glad that I did, especially the commercial stuff, because I learned how to improvise, and I learned how to play jazz figures in a credible way, which was really important later in my life when I got in orchestras where you're doing pops concerts. And if you're going to be able to play in a symphony orchestra in popular idioms and not just sound like a really square white guy trying to play jazz rhythms, then you need to actually sit under people who know what they're doing with that and learn how to do it so you can do it with credibility. So I was really, really fortunate to work under some of the best, not just trombone players, but lots of other instruments as well. But I do remember something really interesting to bring Mr. Kleinhammer back in the conversation. Here I was working full time as a secretary. I was freelancing at night. I was going to school at night at NYU. I was beginning to take some auditions. I took my first audition for the Minnesota Orchestra in 1977, just a year after I graduated from Wheaton, and I got myself to the final four, my first audition, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing. And I got cut at the same time as this other guy. We were third and fourth in the finals, and I'd never heard of him, but it turns out his name was Charlie Vernon. Well, he's now the bass trombonist for Chicago Symphony. He was in the Baltimore Symphony at the time, and then later went to San Francisco and Philadelphia, and finally to Chicago. That was very heady. To my first audition, get in the finals. I thought, well, how hard can this be? Right? Well, my second audition was for the Metropolitan Opera, and I did not advance. Reality check. And I remember the Chicago Symphony came to Carnegie Hall 3 times a year back in those days. And I had gotten a subscription to that for my wife and me, again, in the very last row of Carnegie Hall. But wow, we were there. This was the, Professor Salzman will remember, this was the Schulte Chicago era. It was, a remarkable time.
Right.
A great brass section anchored by Arnold Jacobs on the bottom on tuba, Professor Salzman's teacher, and Adolf Herseth, Bud Herseth on the top on principal trumpet, and just a really amazing cast of characters in between. And one day I asked Mr. Kleinhammer, I called him up and said, "You're coming to New York. Could I have a lesson with you?" Because I hadn't had a lesson with him since I left Wheaton. And so this was, maybe 3 years out from that. He said, "Sure." So I checked out the band room at NYU for the lesson. And I met him at his hotel, took a taxi downtown. I did not have money for a taxi, but I had money for a taxi from Mr. Kleinhammer.
Yeah.
And so I had a lesson with it, but it was like a mirror, a deja vu of my first lesson with him. I played something, and he said, "Play something else." I played something, he said, "Play something else." And I thought, what's going on? And he looked at me with that same penetrating look, but it didn't have the smile that it did at my first lesson. Mm-hmm. And he didn't lower his glasses. He just looked at me. He said, "I'm very disappointed."
Wow.
"It's like you've forgotten everything."
Wow.
And that was like a dagger in my heart. It was just like I wanted nothing more in life than his approval. But he didn't stop there. I think not just because he saw I was about to cry, right, but I was so upset. And he said, "But look, listen." He would say, he had this way, he would just say, "Look." And when Mr. Kleinhammer would say, "Look," you knew he was going to deliver something important. He said, "Look." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to play trombone in an orchestra like you." He said, "Well, why aren't you doing what you need to do so you can get there?" Mm-hmm. And then he unpacked that, and we talked about the work that I was doing, which was mostly commercial. I had changed my playing. I had changed my equipment. I had gone to a slightly smaller mouthpiece with a little more bite because I needed that for the microphone. I wasn't playing in big halls. I was playing in recording studios or orchestra pits in Broadway theaters and stuff. So my sound had changed. Sure, I could still play the excerpts. I had the technique. I had the pitch. I had everything, but it wasn't the style because only time I was playing that stuff was when I was practicing in my closet at home, because we were on the 6th floor of a walk-up apartment, and if I didn't practice into the closet, people would start pounding on the walls. And he said, "Look, maybe it's time for you to stop doing that and get serious about what you need to do so you can get where you want to get." And it was at that moment that I learned the importance of the phrase "delaying present pleasures for future rewards." Mm. That you can't always get what you want right now. you might have to sacrifice that in order to do something else so that you can get a greater, even greater pleasure or greater reward later on.
Mm.
And so I decided to stop doing all that commercial and studio work. I took a job as a high school band director for 2 years. Uh, I enjoyed it. I gained even greater respect for high school band directors than I ever had before. I had a good program, and I did everything. I was a one-man show, did everything from charting marching band to scoring the spring musical, teaching Bach to rock and beginner band and the whole 9 yards. But it had a tremendous benefit. It had a band room I could practice in.
Mm.
And for all of you who are music educators, I don't know how many of you are. I don't know your stories. I just see a bunch of names here. I'm sure you have some. There are some of you here that are who are in school to become educators. Either you've just completed, or you're completing your student teaching, or whatever it may be, or that's on the horizon. But I want to tell you that the most important thing that you can do to help your program is for your students to see you practice your instrument. That is the most important thing that you can do. And so I was in the band room practicing every lunch period I had, before school and after school. And you know how it is with students. It probably was the same for you when you were in high school. The band room is just a hangout area. Kids are eating lunch in there and everything. And so when it was my lunch period and the band room was empty, I was going to practice in the band room. I didn't care if students were around, kids were around. I was in a corner practicing, and they were, talking, and they're sitting with their groups, their friends, boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, chatting, whatever. There's lots of noise in there, and I was just practicing. I was practicing my excerpts, practicing my Koprash exercises, my Bordoni etudes, the whole thing, whatever it was. I was practicing purposefully in that chaotic environment, because I thought, if I can play in this chaotic environment, then I can play anywhere. But my students also saw me, saw my dedication. They weren't putting two and two together and seeing that, well, there's Mr. Yeo, he's practicing so he can leave this job and go to a better one. They weren't thinking that. They were just thinking, oh, he plays a trombone. And I sometimes played with my band. I remember with a jazz band, we did a Jay Chataway chart that Maynard Ferguson recorded called Superbone Meets the Bad Man. It was a piece for Barry Sax and Superbone, the slide trombone with the valves, Holton thing. I played that. Interesting thing, too, as an educator, I had this Barry Sax player who was really talented, but he was just a pain in the neck. And I thought, I have to get to this kid. And the way I got to him was I said, hey, Mike, why don't you play a duet with me at the next jazz band concert? Changed him. And here's another one from that time in teaching high school band. I had another student, trombone player, Kevin, who was incredibly bright and pretty gifted on the trombone. He was a natural born leader, but he was a leader in the wrong way. He could bring kids down a road that wasn't a good road. I think we teachers have a word to describe students. Sometimes we'll say, oh yes, he's charming. Okay, we don't mean he's good looking or something, just he has this charm. He thinks he can get everything by his charm. Okay, Kevin was charming in that way. One day I'm on cafeteria duty and another teacher comes up to me carrying Kevin by the collar and said, Mr. Yeo, did you sign this pass? Well, it wasn't even close. And so I know the Bible says, don't lie. But I looked at Kevin and I thought, if I say no, I didn't, he's going to get suspended again. What's that going to do? Nothing. He's going to go home, be happy not to be in school for a few more days. His parents are going to read him the riot act, and nothing's going to change. But I lied. I said to the teacher, yes, I signed it. And of course, the teacher knew I was lying. And he threw Kevin at me. And then I got Kevin by the collar. Well, you could do that back then. You can't do that today. I don't recommend this, okay? I'd be in jail today. I got Kevin and I said, okay, now you owe me. I said, you have talent and I can use you to help a lot of people. Are you going to straighten up and be on my side? Or are you going to make me go back to that teacher and say, no, actually, I didn't sign it. Suspend him again. Well, you know what? I'm not going to take any credit for what happened after that, but he did straighten up. Because I took a chance on him because I knew if I could get him with me, that could help. And now he is and has been for many years a professor of drama at the New School in New York City, and I am just so proud of him. Like I said, I don't take any credit for it. I never take credit for my students' success. I don't notch their successes on successful auditions and interviews on my mouthpiece or something and say, well, they're my students. So I get no, I don't get credit for them. I'm happy to have been a voice, one of the many voices in their life, in their career. And if they succeed at something that they really wanted to, I rejoice with them. If they succeed at something else, I rejoice with them. If they fall flat on their face, I still try to help them. And that's a great joy, being a teacher. And so I think as we all go through life, as all of you who are much younger than Professor Salzman and me, you will realize how valuable it is that sometime later in life, somebody says to you, thank you. You did such and so. It's something that you probably forgot. You don't even remember. But someone comes to you and says thank you. I just want to encourage you, all of you, as you go through life, to remember the people who did influence you, and remember to go back and let them know that they really were important to you. Uh, Next week I turn 65, so I guess I'm technically a senior citizen. So all of a sudden, the calendar will change from Monday to Tuesday, and all of a sudden I will become a high-risk coronavirus person, because now I'll be 65. Where on Monday I'm not high risk anymore because I was only 64 at 364 days. But
Welcome.
yes, right, my big brother. So, but I know that I'm closer to my end than my beginning, and there are very few things in this life that I have right now that are more valued by me than when someone whose life I touched reminds me that I was part of their journey. And so I want to encourage you all with that. So then I did keep taking auditions, and I finally did win. I won the Baltimore Symphony job in 1981. It was a great job, full of Chicago trained guys in that section, trombone section. Jim Olin from Northwestern, and tuba player Dave Federley, also from Northwestern, and the second trombone player I sat next to, Eric Carlson, who was a classmate of Tim's and mine at Wheaton College, a couple years younger than us, who then went on to, after we were in the Baltimore Symphony together, a year after I left to go to Boston Symphony, he went to the Philadelphia Orchestra, where he still is today. So I got to Boston in 1985, and well, that was just a great career. It was the career that I always dreamed about, and I don't need to tell you all the stories. I could talk to you all day long, tell you stories about all the great conductors and some funny stories about players and soloists and things like that. But the important thing is that I was able to do something that I had trained to do, that I felt God had gifted me to do, and I was really blessed to be able to do it. Not everybody gets to do what they dream to do. And so, Tim, did you send around that article that I asked you to send to everybody?
I did, and I was going to
Okay.
suggest that we kind of go there. I think that would help.
Yeah. Yeah. So because that article came about, as I say in the opening lines, there's a master class that I gave at the International Trombone Festival in Redlands, California, a few years ago. And this is a topic that I've talked about a lot because the topic came to me because of Mr. Kleinhammer. I mean, this was the life that I had from him and the advice that I had gotten from him. And I think that there's a misconception on the part of a lot of people who really want to aspire to the highest level of anything, whatever it is, not just music or trombone performance or clarinet performance or whatever, but whether it's education or business or ministry, whatever it is. I don't know anyone that wants to be mediocre at what they do. Everybody wants to be the best. Everybody wants to make a difference. Everybody wants to reach the top. But the fact is, I think, in my experience as a teacher, okay, teaching young kids at Wheaton College when I was a student, then teaching high school band, then teaching students at Peabody Institute in Baltimore, and then New England Conservatory and Boston University in Boston. Then after I retired from the Boston Symphony in 2012, I flunked retirement and was offered a job, full-time trombone professor at Arizona State. So I did that full-time for 4 years. And now I'm at Wheaton College, not a university, so a whole different kind of student, level of players and everything, but hardworking kids that are just really a joy to work with. But one thing that I've really learned in teaching is how a good teacher needs to let their students know what's actually required to get where it is that they want to get. The hard reality is that everybody has a ceiling. I say in the article, you can't believe the lie, the myth of the 10,000 hours. If I just work 10,000 hours, there's a book about it. If I just work 10,000 hours of well directed practice at anything, I can do anything. No. As I say in the article, I was living in Arizona, so I use the Arizona Cardinals as an example. But if Professor Salzman spent 10,000 hours working out, he would not be a linebacker for the Seattle Seahawks. Sorry, Tim, if that disappoints you,
I,
but
that's going to be my new career after the pandemic. I'm
I hate to be the one to break it to you, but that's not going to happen. Why? It's not just about talent. It's not just about hard work. It's basically you don't have a frame for a linebacker of the Seahawks. You can work out for 10,000 hours, and you're not going to get that frame. You're going to build up lots of bulk. You're going to build up body mass, and you're going to lose fat, and you're going to develop muscle, but you don't have the bones for it. You don't have the frame for it. You don't have the height for it. You don't have the speed for it. You're not going to gain that speed, not at age 65. So I think we have to realize that not it's not true that you can do anything you want to do. It is true that you can do a lot of things that you're gifted to do. And so part of what I was trying to talk about in the article was, how we can actually be honest with ourselves and ask ourselves the important questions so we can get wherever it is that whatever we have will take us. And so I say, it's a combination of talent, hard work, and destiny. That's the God card. Is it meant to, if it's meant to be, it's going to happen. But you are not going to end up in something that you're not gifted to be able to do. You're not going to, well, you could fast talk your way into certain kinds of jobs, but then you'll be exposed really quickly. But you're not going to fast talk your way into the Boston Symphony or the Chicago Symphony or professorship at University of Michigan or somewhere. You're not going to fast talk your way into that. There's too many levels that need to go through for you to be exposed. And so I think I don't need to go through the whole article here. I want to touch on just a few things. But I hope what you're seeing in the article is an expression of several things. First of all, an understanding, a real critical clinical understanding of actually what's required, of how good is good enough for what it is that you want to do. Because I think many of us are under the false impression that all I have to do is do my best and I can achieve anything that I want. But what if your best isn't good enough? It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means that you're not gifted to get to that level of that thing. And as I say at the very end, the top of the mountain is not the only place where you can have an amazing career. Not at all. People can have amazing careers in all sorts of kinds of walks of life. And I have a book here. It's one of my favorite books. It's a prayer book. It's called Every Moment Holy. By what's his name? Douglas McKelvey, I think it is. Yeah, Douglas McKelvey, and it's an interesting book. He's a really gifted author. But then I read about his bio at the end, and what does it say? He's worked as an author, a song lyricist, a script writer, a video director. He's penned more than 350 lyrics, and then the last sentence: Douglas, not me, the author, has served for the last 4 years as the sexton, janitor, at St. John's Anglican Church in Franklin, Tennessee. That's his calling, to be a janitor. And he's got an amazing life, a very self-satisfied life, a life that he feels is honoring, to himself, to God, to his calling, to his family, whatever. So all what I'm saying here is that you don't have to get to the top. We all aspire to the top. We all work to the top. We all want to get there. But if you don't get there, it doesn't mean that you're a failure. So let's just put that aside. Before I got in the Boston Symphony, I never thought for a second that I was a failure, ever. And just because I got to the Boston Symphony doesn't mean that I can't have this conversation with you, because it's easy for you to say, well, you got what you wanted, so how, easy for you to say. Yeah, but you don't remember. See, you don't know. All you know is right now me. Okay, most of you only know me from this moment in time. Some of you may have been around when I was at the Dub, a couple of years ago at the festival. I guess conducted the wind ensemble and the concert band, and I've been at the Dub many times, soloist, working at the festival, playing with the wind ensemble. I think Tim's in my 60th birthday party was playing the Daniel Schneider bass trombone concerto, Sub-Zero. That was a gift to us. One of the most difficult pieces I'd ever played, ever written for the instrument. And I thought, well, 60 years old, this is the time for a challenge. And is that to Tim, this is going to be death or glory. It's no middle ground. And it happened at the Dub. I never played it again. I never played it before. It happened there. So, but don't look at me right now as you see me today, having had 30 years in the Boston Symphony and professor in this, doing this, author, all that kind of. Forget that. Look at me as I was when I was you. This is what I tell my students now. Always, I've always said, I was once like you. I was once in the exact same place. I was once wondering where was my future? Where was this going to take me? What was going to happen? Where was I going to go? And so there was a Doug Yeo long before there was the guy that you see today with all this past tense. This was a guy who had no future tense yet. The future had yet to unfold. And so these things that I'm talking about were the things that were taught to me by my teacher, Ed Kleinhammer, and I would teach to myself, okay, because I would say them to my students, but I would also be preaching to myself. Physician, heal thyself, I would say to myself. I have to believe my own words. And so how good is good enough? As I say in here, you know, when I had students at New England Conservatory and I would talk to them about the day that I retired, I would say, who's the competition at the audition the day I retire from the Boston Symphony? At the audition for the bass trombone chair. Who's the competition? Well, the wrong answer is, well, everybody else is at the audition. No. They're not the competition. The competition to replace me is me. I'm your competition. Doug Yeo's the competition. Why? Because that's the standard that the orchestra had yesterday before the audition. That's the sound, that's the ability, that's the knowledge that was in the bass trombone chair the day before the audition. Now, the Boston Symphony is not a training ground. It's a proving ground, as is any job. You hear me say that, and you may think that's not fair. That's not fair. It's not fair. You've been in the orchestra for 30 years. You know, you're 57 years old. You've been doing this your whole life. You have all this experience. You play with all these conductors, play with all these soloists, toured around the world, done all this stuff. It's not fair for you to say that you're the competition. And I say, you're absolutely right. It's not fair, but that's the way it is. So we have to get over the idea that it's not fair. Now, does that mean that the person who wins the job has to play exactly like me? No, of course not. But that person has to show at that audition that they're ready the next day to step into that job and sit in that seat and do that job at the level of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. I haven't told you my first day with the Boston Symphony. My last concert with the Baltimore Symphony was in Carnegie Hall. And interestingly enough, on the program was the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, which had been written for the Boston Symphony. And my car was packed. It was in the garage below Carnegie Hall, and I drove up to Boston the next day, that night, overnight. And I stayed with Chester Schmitz, the tuba player. Stayed in his Airstream trailer in his driveway for a few weeks till I found a place for my family to move up where we could live. And the next day, my first service with the Boston Symphony was Boston Pops concert conducted by John Williams that was being recorded for broadcast on PBS, the Evening at Pop series that went on for 25 years, with no rehearsal, and a microphone and a camera right here on my head. That was my first service with the Boston Symphony. That was not a training ground. That was a proving ground. And so you don't know what that job is going to be like. You're dying to get it. You want it. You're dying for it. But let's keep in mind that there is a standard there that you want to attain to. Now, if you're not at that standard, that's okay. There are other places where your standard, your ability is going to take you. And that can be an amazing thing. But we need to look for each place that we might be interested in living our lives, what actually would be taken there, what would take to get there. When I, here at Wheaton College, I've developed a mission statement for the trombone studio. You can find it. Professor Salzman can send you all the links. My website, which is my name backwards, yodoug.com. My blog, thelasttrombone.com. If you Google Wheaton College Douglas Yeo, you'll come to my biography there. And there's a little tab called Faith and Learning, and that's where I have this little statement about the mission statement that I have at Wheaton College. And I unpack three particular things about what my teaching is all about at Wheaton College. And I don't need to unpack them all here, but I'm just going to touch on them. The first is stewardship, which means I'm going to be a good steward of the talents that I've been given. I'm going to work hard to represent and be grateful for that which has been given to me, and I'm going to go forward with that. I'm not going to be lazy. I'm not going to put my talents and abilities somewhere else. I'm not going to run away from them. I'm going to be a good steward of them. Second is excellence. I'm going to commit myself to excellence, and excellence needs to be defined. But I think, as Harold Best said memorably, excellence is the norm of stewardship. If we're being good stewards of the talents that we've been given and the gifts that we've been given, if we're being good stewards of those, we can't fail but to treat them as things that we want to do excellently. And then finally, the third is mission, a sense of why are we doing this? What's the whole point to this? And so from that sort of mission statement, I come to three, what I call the core values. And these are the things I just want to unpack with all of you today in particular. The first one is pay attention. Pay attention to everything that's going on. People often ask me, who is my teacher? And of course I say Ed Kleinhammer and Keith Brown in Indiana. But then I say, oh yes, and Jean-Pierre Rampal, flute. Oh yes, and Thomas Quasthoff, baritone. Oh yes, and Jeffrey Bronfman, piano. Oh yes, and don't forget Anne-Sophie von Otter, the great singer. Oh yeah, and Vic Firth on timpani, and oh yeah, John Furlow on oboe, and Buddy Wright on clarinet. Okay, these people had nothing to do with the trombone, but they were my teachers. Because when I was in the Boston Symphony, I had a lot of time to learn. You can't see it very well, but back here, this is a photograph of the Boston Symphony at my last concert. And around it is a mat. It's signed by all of my colleagues. It's one of the nice things they give you when you retire from the orchestra. This is a program from my first opening night concert here with the personnel list from that first concert. It was actually, Tim, you'll appreciate this, on that opening night concert, not just Don Juan, which opened the concert, and then by Strauss, and then Brahms' First Symphony, but the soloist was Maurice Andre.
Oh, wow.
Who played on the Wheaton College Artist Series in 1975 when we were students. And so, and then there's a certificate, and then the other thing they give you, which is a pension, and that's nice too. The first of every month, I'm grateful for that. But if you could see this photo carefully, it's a photograph of Beethoven Ninth Symphony. My last concert was conducted by Bernard Haitink, the great music director of the Concertgebouw Orchestra in Amsterdam, principal guest conductor of the Boston Symphony for many years. Also of the Chicago Symphony, the conductor for whom I have the utmost respect and esteem. And the orchestra is playing, the chorus is there, everyone's in full throat, just absolutely going at it, except the three trombones were all sitting there with our hands in our laps folded. Because that's what trombones do, right? My life was a career of playing as loudly as I possibly could for a very short period of time, followed by a very, 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 very long period of rest, followed by playing a very, very short period of time as softly as I possibly could, followed by a very, 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 very long period of rest. And so here at Beethoven Ninth Symphony, I'm so happy for this photo because that was a microcosm of my life. And so in a sense, it's a life that's more difficult than the violinist who's playing 40,000 notes in the Brahms First Symphony where I only have 2 pages. Because when I come in, everybody knows it. There's no hiding. And I'm often playing, I'm cold. I sit for 3 movements. I sit for 30 minutes before I play the first note. And the first note, you feel like you're absolutely naked. You've dropped your trousers around your ankles and you're standing there kind of covering yourself up. I'm all by myself. What's going on here? But because of that, I had the opportunity to pay attention. And so I could have sat on stage just, picking up a book and just reading a book the whole time, or a magazine, or in later days, take your iPhone, kind of put it down low, so the conductor doesn't see you're looking at it while you're doing, playing games with somebody. Oh yeah, I could have done that. But no, I would sit there with the score in my hand and I'd be listening and paying attention to what was going on around me. I had an amazing opportunity. I had the best seat in the house. Plus I was getting paid. I mean, come on. I was getting paid every day to have a master class by my colleagues and these amazing soloists and conductors. And I could just tell you story after story of things that I learned from soloists and conductors that just really changed my life. But the idea of just paying attention, and not just paying attention to your thing. Don't, if you're a trombone player, don't just go to the trombone master classes. I mean, they're interesting, but they're not interesting enough. Go to the vocal master classes. Go to the clarinet master classes. Go to the violin master classes. Good grief! I remember one time I was giving a guest master class at a Christian music festival called the Masterworks Festival for high school kids and young college kids. And there was a violinist, Stephen Clapp, who was the dean at Juilliard, recently deceased. And he was giving a master class to this young girl, and he was talking to her about her bow arm. And he said something in this master class that I've been trying to find words to say to my students for decades, and he put it in there. He said, look, you're using way too much elbow. He said, look, your body's made of hinges. Use the hinges closest to the bow before you use hinges that are further away from the bow. So he was saying, use your fingers before your knuckles before your wrist before your elbow before your shoulder. Otherwise, you're using way too much unnecessary movement. It's the same thing with the right hand slide technique on a trombone. And I learned it in a
same thing in conducting.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, Reiner never used his elbow, right? Or neither did Ravelli.
Right.
Okay, it was all right in the wrist, all right up in front here. And somehow or other, they were able to get their points across. Now, Leonard Bernstein did it in a different way. He was all over the place, and that was effective for him. And I was counted as one of my great blessings to have played many concerts under his baton. It was always an event to have Leonard Bernstein on the podium. But so pay attention. Pay attention to as many things as you possibly can, not just musically, but otherwise, whether it's literature or whether you're out in nature. I mean, good grief, walking around in Redwood National Park, in Northern California, with trees that are 300 feet tall. That affected my trombone playing. Standing on the rim of the Grand Canyon for the first time, that affected my trombone playing. All right. So if we pay attention, if we actually pay intentional attention to things, there's a lot that we can learn that can inform us as people and as musicians. And I should say this too. I never refer to myself as a trombonist. That's just not interesting enough. I think we should always think of ourselves at the highest level that of our calling, which is artist. Okay, you were called, and once you're called as an artist, your life could have gone in a bazillion different ways. Could have gone to ballet or graphic arts or sculpture or whatever. No, then it went to music. And then in music, it could have gone in a bazillion different ways. It could be a composer or a conductor or educator or symphony player or jazz or ska or reggae or pop or rock, whatever it is. But no, then it went to the trombone. So I am an artist, musician, trombonist in that order. But don't ever just, don't insult me by calling me a trombone player. That's just not interesting enough, okay? Compliment me by saying you're an artist who's a musician who happens to play the trombone. Because if I hadn't been drawn to the trombone, if I had been called as an artist and musician, I would have been called to something else in music. But trombone was my calling. Okay, pay attention. Second of all, try everything. Try everything. Now, we all have decisions to make as musicians. And you're all musicians. Whether or not you're heading towards a vocational career as a musician, you're all musicians. Okay. When you get a new piece of music, whether it's a solo or an etude, you make choices on the sight reading level right away. You make conscious and unconscious decisions right then to decide where you're going to breathe, the tempo, the dynamic, how deep a breath you're going to take, how you're going to make that slur. If you're a trombone player, is it going to be a natural slur? Is it going to be a vowel slur? Is it going to be an air attack? Is it going to be a tongue slur? Whatever. You make all these decisions on the sight reading level. Now, as you go forward, how many of those decisions do you ever actually really revisit? What I find with so many of my students is that they never really advance themselves fundamentally past the sight reading level. They stay with decisions that they made right away at the beginning. They improve the sound, the style, all those kinds of things. But if I had a trombone in my hand, I would demonstrate it to you. But very often, you just take a breath mark And I'll say to a student who play a say the Lebedev Concerto Number One, the concerto in one movement, originally for tuba, hijacked by bass trombonists for years, and there's a everybody takes a breath. They go da 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 breath ba da 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 da, etc., etc. Everybody takes a breath. Why? Because in Alan Ostrander's edition of the piece, there's a breath mark there. So I say to students, I said, why do you take a breath there? Oh, because it's marked. I said, well, does Alan Ostrander have all the good ideas? What does the music say? Does the music say there should be a breath there? Oh, I don't know. I never thought about it. Okay, I want you to play that without that breath. Oh, I don't think I can make it. Have you ever tried it? No, but I don't think try it. Do it. And they always do. I never had a student that couldn't make it without taking that breath. And I say, did it surprise you? And they always say yes. I said, it shouldn't surprise you because you should have been doing that years ago, weeks ago, days ago. You should be trying everything. You should always be revisiting the assumptions that you made in an earlier time. Not to make yourself insecure. No, on the contrary. You do that in order to benefit from the fact that today you're a better player than you were yesterday. If you don't keep revisiting that and saying, is this, look, I have this breath mark. Is that still the best place to breathe? Now, 90% of the time, you're going to look at a previous decision and you're going to say, yep, that was a good decision when I made it, and it's still a good decision now. But for that 3 or 4% of the time that you're going to look at that and say, wait a minute, maybe, hold it. I'm a more mature musician right now. I'm a better player. I have better breath control. You know, when I took my one lesson with Arnold Jacobs and he hooked me up to all his machines, okay, to measure my vital lung capacity, and it came out at 3.6 liters. And I was kind of average for a 19-year-old 6-foot person. I thought, well, that's interesting. It doesn't feel very like I like to do better. I didn't realize until he told me I can actually increase that by exercise and work and everything. And then later I went to Boston and I got a pulmonary workup at a hospital and I had a 6.1 liter capacity. Oh, almost not quite doubled, but significantly better. Well, you're getting better too. But if you don't give yourself a chance to ask the question of how can I uh, make my improvement be manifested in my playing, if you don't ask the question, it's not going to be there. It's just not going to be there. So keep asking yourself the questions. Is this still the best decision? Breath, tempo, fingering, quality or type of slur, whatever it may be. And don't just do it in music, do it in all of life. Because you're a different person, you're a better person, you're a more skilled person, you're a more mature person today than you were yesterday. And imagine the difference between now and a month ago and a year ago. You're all young, okay? So you can't imagine, most of you probably, being 30 or 40, much less 50 or 60. You can't imagine that. That's completely out of the realm of comprehension right now. But it will happen. Lord willing, you'll be alive in your 60s and 70s and maybe even the 80s with your marbles and be able to still do things, okay? So right now you can't really see where you're going to be. Someone like Tim Salzman and I, we can look back and see where we were and say, oh, thank God that I continued to grow as a person, that I didn't just sit there at that level. If I stayed at the level that I was when I got first chair in New Jersey All-State, that wouldn't have taken me to the Boston Symphony. No, that was what I needed to get to first chair in New Jersey All-State. Great. But that wasn't the end of my story. And that's not going to be the end of your story. The end of your story doesn't end after you graduate from UW. It doesn't end there. It continues to go. And so keep asking yourself and questioning those assumptions, not for insecurity, but for benefit. If you try everything, if you try every possible option, okay, of how to make a particular slur, and almost every slur that any musician has, you can execute in at least 3 different ways. And you may mark it down in your part how you're going to do that, or what slide position, or what fingering on the trumpet, or what you're going to do on the saxophone, and whether or not you're going to use that octave key or not. You got all sorts of options of things. Or which string you're going to use on the viola. Whatever it is, you got all sorts of options. If you try every one and find the one that works best for you, they're all available to you. And every day is different. I'm not a machine. I'm a human being. And my playing is different every day. because I feel different. The humidity is different. The temperature is different. My life is different. I may have had an argument with one of my kids or my wife. I may have dry mouth because I had Chinese food last night, whatever. And every time you have a decision you have to make in music, it's impacted by what's going on in your body. And you make decisions on a microsecond level. You make a decision on what position or how to do a slur on a microsecond because you just know that today this is going to work instead of this is going to work. You couldn't predict it. You couldn't map it out. You couldn't write it down with your pencil. But as you're getting ready to make that move from A natural to D natural, you say today it's going to be fourth position instead of first position. And it happens and you don't even think about it. And why don't you think about it? Because you've tried every possible way. You've done it over and over and over in all kinds of conditions, and you know how your body works and reacts to every condition that you could possibly have. Remember I told you earlier that I used to practice in my band room when I was in a high school band director, and there were students talking and everything was chaotic environment. Whenever I would go to play an audition, I would always play my excerpts in front of the TV with MTV on. I don't know. Is MTV even a thing now? I don't even know. But it was loud. It was loud. It was rock. It was sometimes heavy metal, whatever. Back there in the 70s and 80s, it was, really loud. And I would put the TV on and play it as loud as I could. And I would be there playing the Schumann Rhenish Symphony or the Brahms Fourth Chorale or Blasting Away the Ride of the Valkyries. Why? Because I wanted to deliberately cause distraction to my eyes. I wanted to deliberately make distractions to me that I could push through, because if I could play it with distractions, then I felt that I could handle it better in a controlled environment. It's a little bit like running with weights on your ankles and then you take them off for the race. And I remember I auditioned for the San Francisco Symphony before I got in Baltimore. I got through the semifinals, but I remember that I came off stage and there was another candidate who had been out before me, and he was just pacing up and down the hallway, and he was just swearing and cursing and yelling, and he finally got up to me. So I had just come off stage. He said, "Did you see that exit sign? It was just blinking the whole time. It was incredibly distracting." And I thought, what exit sign? Because I'd played through MTV. No exit sign was going to get in my way. Seriously. Okay, so we try everything to try to create every possible decision and environment and find the one that works best for you at that moment so that all of it is available to you. Finally, pursue greatness. A lot is made these days about, just imagine what it is you want to be. So actualize your internal stuff. Okay. Now, imagining greatness isn't what I'm talking about. Even desiring greatness is not what I'm talking about. Even wanting it or working hard to be great, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about pursuing greatness. When you hear something that is great, when you see something that is great, when you know something is great, run after it. Run after it with all of the passion in your being. It's the pursuit that we do that's at the core. Not just how we do, but how are you going to pursue that? I talked earlier about delaying present pleasures for future rewards. Right now, there's a lot about, Michael Jordan right now on this thing on ESPN. Great player. Okay. I don't get into the arguments about who is the greatest of all time in any discipline, whether it's, Tom Brady or Babe Ruth or Ted Williams or, Ichiro or whatever. The greats are the greats. And I'll leave it to other people to talk about who was the greatest. But when you see greatness, you know it. And if you will surround yourself with that, if those will become your models, and as you pursue them and they come to you, maybe Leonard Bernstein doesn't come to you, but he comes to you in his recordings. He comes to you in the concerts that you go to. And so whatever the greatness is that you are aspiring to, if it is reading great authors and running after them and saying to yourself, why is this sentence great? Why is this opening line great? Why does this book bring me into it because of the language of this writer? Why does this conductor, when this person, when he or she steps up on the podium, they have your immediate respect just like that? That's greatness there. And so you're going to run after that as fast and as hard as you can, holding it before you the whole time. Just like when I was in the back row of the gallery in Orchestra Hall and I stared at Mr. Kleinhammer until I saw my 18-year-old head on his big body. It was just a dream. It was just a fantasy. It was just a hope. There was nothing real about that. There was no reasonable reason why I could say I expected that could or would happen. But that was my desire. I just thought, God, you have gifted me to be able to play the trombone. I don't know where this is going to take me. But wherever it takes me, wherever it goes, okay, whether I get there or I don't get there, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because I didn't pursue it. And so the idea of pursuit, whether it's in a healthy way in a relationship, oh yeah, I'm crazy about her. I'm going to run after her and not stalk her. We're not talking about that, okay? I'm going to run after that. I'm going to let her know why I think that she is such an amazing person or he is such an amazing person. Whatever it is, you are pursuing that. You're pursuing that goal. Michael Jordan was not the greatest high school basketball player. He wasn't. And if you read Michael Jordan, you read how he had friends that wanted him to go out and do things on Friday and Saturday nights. And that he thought, no, I have to shoot hoops because I have something else I want to do. And they would rip him. They would make fun of him. They would just lay him out flat. He's not cool. He's not one of us. He's not one of the group, etc., etc. And he said, I got to shoot hoops. Well, he became Michael Jordan. And all right, they're working at Burger King or whatever. I don't know. But they didn't become Michael Jordan. Now, that's not to say everybody could become Michael Jordan. That's not what I'm saying here. But he understood that he had a goal and he was pursuing it, even when he was young, long before he became the Michael Jordan that we know now. And we look back and, and we're seeing this whole thing on TV and everything. I mean, how many championships did he win? I don't know. You lose count. So, and what, 3 in a row? That's crazy. So anyway, all that's to say, these 3 things: pay attention, try everything, pursue greatness. If we can keep these things in mind in whatever it is that we do, you're going to have a chance. You're going to have a chance. My article unpacks a lot of other kinds of things. Notice I say things like you need to have impeccable intonation, not just great intonation, not like really good intonation, not like amazing. No, impeccable. So if you don't have impeccable intonation and you can't get impeccable intonation, well, then you've hit your ceiling. So you have to set the bar really, really high for any achievement that you're going to make. Set it as high as you possibly can and see where you can go with that, with your combination of talent, hard work, and destiny. No, unlike the title of the book, talent is not overrated. Talent is really, really important. Hard work is really, really important. But those 2 things, and destiny, sense of calling, is it meant to be? The God card, whatever, that's really, really important. But none of those 3 things in and of themselves alone will get you where you need to go. Because if it's meant to be, you're going to be equipped to be able to do it. If it's meant for you to play principal trumpet in the Chicago Symphony, you're not going to play like a 4th grader. So you will have had to put in the work and you will have had to have the talent. It's the things together. It's not individual, just one or just 2. It needs all 3. And so set your goals high. Find your role models. Understand what is needed and how good is good enough. Run hard after greatness. Try all the possible options you possibly can about something. And most of all, pay attention. Look, one final story, and then I'll turn it over to Professor Salzman here. When Maurice Andre came to Wheaton College, back in 1975. He came with a little chamber orchestra, the Wittenberg Chamber Orchestra. It was small, had a harpsichord, maybe three fiddles, two violas, two cellos, and a bass. And Andre. And he was playing what we call the spaghetti concertos, the Albinoni and the Vivaldi and the Tartini, okay, and all these concertos that end with I. And Andre was amazing. Well, Mr. Kleinhammer was at that concert. At a lesson a few weeks earlier, he asked me if I could get him 2 tickets to the concert because his first wife had died in 1972, and he was dating a woman in church, and he said, I want to take her to the Maurice Andre concert. Can you get me some tickets? I said, yeah, sure. So I got him tickets. And I had a lesson. The concert was, I think, on a Saturday night. I had a lesson the next Tuesday. And I went into the lesson, and I ran up the 9 floors in the Fine Arts Building to a studio. I saw the person before me had come out. I went in, and I said, Mr. Kleinhammer, I started talking about, Andre, and we didn't use the word awesome back then. Nobody thought of that, but I was just blathering away. Oh, he was amazing. What do you think? And Mr. Kleinhammer just looked at me with this kind of confused look. And he said, oh, yes, Andre, he was really good. But did you hear that bass player? He made a concerto out of every note. I thought, I missed it. I wasn't looking at the bass player. I was looking at the guy playing all the 16th notes and just sounding amazing. I realized I wasn't paying attention. And I had missed an opportunity there. And Mr. Kleinhammer taught me that at that very moment, that there was more to things than the big flash, that there were things here and there and there that can teach me just as much or more than the famous thing, the big thing, the notable thing, the top thing, the loud thing. So this is where my message to you, my young friends, if we pay attention, if we try everything, if we pursue greatness, all in the cause of being good stewards of our talents, of being committed to excellence, not mediocrity, but excellence, and having a sense of mission, the why. What's the reason why we are doing what we're doing? You're going to have an incredibly interesting life. But if you don't do those things and you just get really good at doing your one thing, I can tell you, it's not enough. It is not going to satisfy you. Guaranteed. You need more than that. I'll finish with this one last story. I remember back in the days before direct deposit of paychecks, I stood in line for my paycheck on a Friday afternoon before a concert. And in front of me was a young violinist who had just gotten in the Boston Symphony 2 weeks before. She had gotten in the BSO during her senior year at Curtis. Okay? I didn't have that path. She was incredibly gifted. So she got to the Boston Symphony. She's playing violin in the orchestra. At that time, the Boston Symphony's salary was the highest of any orchestra in America. And she opens up her paycheck in front of me with the personnel manager, just gave her first paycheck. And she looks at it and she says, "That's all?" And I thought, this isn't going to go very well. And it hasn't. She's still in the orchestra over 30 years later. She's a miserable, unhappy person. She hates the job. She phones it in. And because she thought she was going to do it for a paycheck. And it wasn't really what she wanted. She wanted to be Heifetz. Okay, if that didn't work, she wanted to be in the Juilliard String Quartet. If that didn't work, well, I guess I'll be in the Boston Symphony, but how hard can it be? This wasn't enough. You've got to do things for more reasons than that. And I know there's talent in these 35 people here in this room here, and among those of your peers who are not here. But I hope that you'll take this from one, okay, not the one who's been in the Boston Symphony all these years and friend of Tim Salzman, done all this kind of stuff, but one who is just like all of you at your season of life, doing the same things that you're doing. I didn't walk your halls, but I walked halls just like yours. Well, nobody's walking halls right now. Lord willing, we'll be back in the fall for those of you that are returning. But you get the idea. The metaphor is still good. I once did what you did. And there's a great future out there for all of you, but you've got to see it. You've got to have the vision for it. You've got to have the gratitude for the gifts, and you've got to do it with a sense of mission. Like, what's the point of the whole thing? All right, so that's my lecture for the day. Professor Salzman, I turn it over to you, my friend.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I want to get some time here for the students to ask questions. I think Gabriel is moderating. Am I right, Gabriel?
Yeah, I am.
And you know Gabriel, Doug, because he's the one who took care of your horn, right?
You did.
I did. Back when all of this first started, I'm still really sad that we didn't get to play together.
I know. That was really something. I wish my trombone had gotten frequent flyer miles. So getting all the way out to Seattle and back. But anyway, okay, nice to see you.
Nice to see you as well. Well, first question we have, they wanted me to ask. It's asking, what is your musical ceiling, and how and when did you know you reached it?
Yeah, so when I say everybody has a ceiling, that's it. You know, the lie is you can be all, you know, you can be anything you want. No, I think the Army has it better. You know, be all that you can be. We don't know what you might not know what you can be, but for me, the ceiling was evident in that first lesson with Mr. Kleinhammer. I worked hard. I was a good player. I thought I was something. I wasn't really a. I mean, it's always suspicious if someone says I wasn't prideful, because that's a prideful statement. But I wasn't a jerk. I just was a pretty good trombone player. But I realized when he had me play that B flat scale that I had not been paying attention to a lot of things, and there was a lot of things that I didn't know. So I think when I look at the ceiling, it's one of those things that you'll know when you're there. When I was a student at IU, I had a roommate who was the best man at my wedding. We met in New Jersey Allstate, and he was a great guy. And I auditioned and I got in the fourth orchestra, and he auditioned and got in the lowest band. And he was actually, I thought, a much more gifted trombone player than me, but he hit his ceiling when his natural talent ran out. That he was not able to push up against that because he did not have the work ethic for it. So while I had less talent, I hit my ceiling, my talent ceiling, a little sooner, but then was able to work harder to push that up. So there's not a same answer for everybody there about what's the ceiling and how do I know that I'm there. You've got to find it. You've got to find it for yourself. And you know who's going to tell you what your ceiling is? The people that are around you. As I said in my article, you know, first of all, if you want to play first trumpet in the Chicago Symphony, and you're last chair in the lowest band as a senior in college, that's probably an indication that maybe that's not a realistic path for you. It could change, but don't think for a second that just because you want it, you're capable of getting it. Because desire is not enough. Desire is really important. That's the one thing I cannot teach. I cannot teach desire. I think Professor Salzman could tell you the same thing. Any teacher, I can teach you where to put your tongue on the William Tell Overture and what position to play a D, you know, on Tannhäuser, but I can't give you desire. That's something you have to have yourself. And so, are you willing to push through and delay present pleasures for future rewards, to make the sacrifices? You know, go to my website, go to my resources section, go to the FAQ section. The first question in my FAQ section is, how good is good enough? And I unpack this a lot more deeply in there. But it is really a life about sacrifices and making changes. That doesn't make me a candidate for martyrdom or something, because I worked hard and I had sacrifices, you know, when I was young. But that is a piece of the puzzle. And I think anyone who's been truly successful and has had a truly rewarding life at any level of accomplishment is going to tell you the same thing. So there you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And then next up is our tuba player, or one of them, Patrick. Do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Hey, Patrick.
Hi. Yeah. So I'm a really, really big fan of your interpretations of the Bach cello suites.
Thank you.
And so I was curious if you could just kind of, you kind of answered it and kind of talked about it a little bit when you were giving us the 3 points, the pay attention and try everything and all that. But I was just wondering if you could dive a little bit more into how you approach interpretation when you do have a new piece put down in front of you.
Yeah. So the first thing I do is not go to trombone players. So the first thing I do is not run out and buy a recording of it. The first thing I do is I try to figure out who's this composer and what do they have to say. And so I'll look at my part and I'll want to hear other music by that person. I want to read something about them. You can't see it here. I'll try to. Okay, these are a few bookshelves I have. I own 3,000 books. This is just a few here. Okay, there's a shelf over here that has only composer biographies, and then this is another shelf that's only books about musical instruments. Okay, and over here in the back, I mean, these are books, only books that are just about the trombone. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. And so if I get a new piece, if I get a Bach cello suite movement, I'll go over here and I'll pull down my books about Bach. And I'll put them on the desk, right? Okay, and so what do I have here? Dance and the Music of J.S. Bach, published by Indiana University Press. The Cello Suites by Eric Siblin. Whoop, this is about Pablo Casals. Bach and the Baroque. John Elliott Gardner's book about Bach. Okay, great early music conductor. The Cambridge Companion on Bach. 2 editions of Dance and the Music of J.S. Bach, actually. Okay, wasn't enough to have the first edition, I had to have the second edition. Okay, so all of this is to say that I want to find out who's Bach. If I'm preparing the Bach Fifth Suite Saraband for an audition, which you do, every bass trombone player does, tuba players do too. Okay, it's impossible. It's impossible. It's the only movement that Bach ever wrote in the cello suites that does not have double stops. There's no realization issue that has to be sorted out. How do I handle the double stops? Do I do multiphonics? Do I just do a grace note before a beat, or do I do it after a beat? You don't have, no, it's just 5 or 6 notes per measure. And so, well, who was Bach? Why was he writing this? What was this about? What was the time period that he was doing it? Look, whatever I'm working on, I need to know more than just the trombone part, because the trombone part just isn't enough. I mean, I only have 54 notes in the Brahms Fourth Symphony. Only 54 notes. And not every note is a pearl. It's very, very important. But it's not, that's not the only thing that's going on there. So when I study, there's a FAQ in my website on score study. And I have a lot of comments that various conductors have made about different kinds of pieces. You know, I mean, when I played the Shostakovich 15th Symphony, it was conducted by Kurt Sanderling, who had premiered several of Shostakovich's symphony and knew him really well, was co-conductor of the Leningrad Philharmonic with Yevgeny Mervinsky, the great conductor of Leningrad. And he would tell us things about what was what he knew that Shostakovich had told him about an episode in a piece. You know, I mean, I was going right to the source there. And I'm taking notes furiously in my score while my colleagues are, you know, sitting around looking at their iPhones in rehearsal. Okay? But I felt that when I played a Shostakovich symphony, I had been paying attention to things. And so I don't just go to the trombone part or the tuba part, you know, right away. I see that, I look at it, then what's the context? Where am I? Over here on this shelf back here, these are all my facsimile scores. I have 50 facsimile scores in composers' manuscripts. Okay, so I love looking at composer manuscripts. Okay, whether it's Verdi or Mahler or Brahms or Bach, I like to see how do they put the notes on the paper? How does it look? What was going on there? And so I'll look at that and I want to find out the whole context. And so if I play the little chorale at the end of the Schubert Unfinished Symphony, the second movement, this is little chorale with 2 clarinets and 2 bassoons. Mr. Kleinhammer always called that passage bass trombone bolero. Okay, it's marked double P, pianissimo, playing what, the third trombone with 2 clarinets and 2 bassoons. Is there any instrument in the whole orchestra that can play softer than a clarinet? And he puts a third trombone player on it? Are you serious? Schubert, what are you thinking about? Okay, but it's only when I look at my part in the piece, in that 5-part chorale, and where my leading tone's going, what's the voice leading going on there, and what's happening. This little chorale almost happened one other time in the piece, but it didn't. Why is it happening now here at the end, but it didn't happen in the midpoint? For me, that kind of curiosity allows my playing, even if just that tiny little chorale, bass trombone bolero, that tiny little chorale, that allows it then to take on a different kind of meaning. And so when I would play excerpts, I would try to communicate in a 15-second playing of the minor version of the Ride of the Valkyries. Okay, what is it, 8 measures? It goes by in 15 seconds. I would want the listener to know that I understood that I was a Valkyrie, demigod, half human, half god in Wagner's economy, okay, who was a heroine running around picking up dead warriors, dead heroes, bringing them back to Valhalla to recondition them, okay? I was a woman. I was a strong woman, amazingly strong woman. The Valkyries were women, 8 of them. Brunhilde was not yet on the scene. I was trying to get all that information in my thing. And so if you buy my orchestral excerpt book called The 100, and Patrick, ask Professor Sullivan, give him my email address. Send you got to play the Ride of the Valkyries too, right? So I'll send you my page of commentary for my excerpt book. I give you, in my excerpt book, I spend a whole page of just commentary of all the problems you have to solve in the first measure of the Ride of the Valkyries. That's just one measure. All right? But you've got 8 big problems you got to solve in that first measure. And if you only solve 7 of them and somebody else solves 8, you go home. And the other one signs a contract. So, it's just to follow this up just briefly, because I could talk all day and you don't want to be here all day. But let me just say this. When you're preparing orchestral excerpts, there are 2 for auditions. There's 2 questions you have to ask yourself. And so this is whether or not you're auditioning for the Chicago Symphony or you're auditioning for the placement in the UW Wind Ensemble. You have to ask yourself 2 questions. Number 1, why are they asking this? What's the point? What are they hoping to learn about you and your playing from this? From that you're playing this particular excerpt. Okay, that's really, really important because if you just approach it and say I have to play this great, that's not enough. So what is it you're trying to do that will satisfy them? Second thing is, where are the places in this excerpt that every person who approaches it has to solve a problem? Because it's a problem spot. Every person has the same thing. And so the audition committee, okay, when you get to Meistersinger Overture, right? And you have that big tuba solo at letter J or something, is it? Ba, ba, bum, ba. Why would I remember it's letter J? Okay, that tells you part of the story. Okay, so what's the first problem you have to solve? Okay, how is that 8th note being placed? If you can't play C, G, G, G in tune and in time, it doesn't matter how good your B-low is. Because the job isn't B-low. The job is ba, 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 ba. Right? That's an umpa. Bum, 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 bum. Right? That's the job. All right? Tubby the tuba. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I just wrote a 30,000 word article about Tubby the tuba. Seriously. It's in the International Tuba Journal, all of 2000 and 2020 and 21. So you can check it out. Umpas, big thing. So, but you have to, where are the places that have problems? And then everyone has to solve the problem, and then you have to be the one person that solves them. And so when I send you my list of 8 things you got to solve in the first measure of the Ride of the Valkyries, if you're the person that solves all 8, you go home with the contract. Most people never even think about them. They're just like way over their head because they just think, I just have to play this great. I have to get it in tune. I have to get it in time. I have to get the rhythm right. Good. That's just 3 of the things. So analyze your music from the point of view of the composer, and then analyze it from the point of view of the interpreter, the big picture interpreter, the conductor. So what's happening here? To understand, okay, why is the Ride of the Valkyries marked fortissimo? Have you ever seen a schematic of the opera pit in Bayreuth in Germany where Wagner had his operas premiered? It's not just a pit that, it's like a big hole, just one level like this. No, the Bayreuth pit starts up here where the conductor is. And then the violins are down here. And then the woodwinds are down here. And then the brasses are way down here at Nibelheim. And the percussion are even further down there. It's like this gigantic sloping thing. So the trombone players are always looking up at the conductor like this. So of course you're going to be marked double F, but the flutes are going to be marked single F. Because by the time the sound gets out from you're way under the stage, there's a context there, okay? You're way under the stage, and so by the time your sound gets out, it's not going to drown the singers out. But you have to realize that he's overwriting the dynamics for the trombones. So in an audition, if you come in and just blast the roof off, bye-bye, because that's an old song. You know, that we're done with that. We're done with that. You know, I play like a pig and just, you know, knock the walls down. That's over. It's a past tense. We're a little bit more enlightened now. So I would just say all of these things, you know, whether it's, you know, reading a book on the Bach B minor mass, or whether it's just, you know, this dance and the music of Bach, really enlightening thing. And I have a book back here on Bach. Oh yes, Anner Bilsma, the great cellist. This is a book that's out of print, but you can find anything. Go to abebooks.com. You can find anything. Bach the Fencing Master by Bilsma. Okay, where he just incredibly insightful, one of the great Baroque cellists of the world. You know, and I had a great correspondence with him, you know, for many years, and it was just really enlightening to get. To read his book, which was a synthesis of, you know, 60 years of playing the Bach cello suites. I mean, did you know Rostropovich didn't record the cello suites until he was 60 years old?
Wow.
Seriously. He waited until he was 60. He'd been playing them his whole life since he was 7 years old. But he didn't feel like he knew them well enough. Oh my goodness. Thank you for your humility, Maestro. But the man really knew something. But I remember when he turned 60, how did he celebrate his 60th birthday? He played a month of concerts with the Boston Symphony. For 3 weeks in Symphony Hall, he played 3 cello concertos each night. 3 the first week, 3 the next, 3 the next, and then the 4th week we went to Carnegie Hall, and on 3 consecutive nights he played 3 concertos. 3, 3, 3, 9 concertos. Happy birthday, Maestro. Amazing. Amazing. But I remember we did a recording session of 2 of them. We did the Dvorak Cello Concerto and the Tchaikovsky Rococo Variations in Symphony Hall. No trombones in the Rococo Variations, but my colleague Norman Bolter, the second trombone player, and I decided to go up into the first balcony of Symphony Hall overlooking the stage during the recording session for the Rococo Variations because we wanted to watch Rostropovich and learn from him because we were paying attention. I'll never forget. He's up there doing some crazy technical variation, going way up on the fingerboard, and he takes the bow, and it was a down bow like this, and it went, and the bow pointed right at Norman and me. He knew we were there, and he winks, like, I just showed you fellas something. And he did. And all my other colleagues were down in the coffee room. Just saying. Whose trombone is that behind you, Patrick?
That's mine. Yeah.
Okay, so you're a doubler.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, I wish you well. Good question. It's a really big question. Check out my website, the resources section, the FAQ section for my FAQ on the Bach cello suites, on score study, on how good is good enough. That'll help.
One more quick one, Gabriel.
Well, there's 2 questions left. One's going to be super quick. We have a member whose dad marched in the All-American band, and so he's curious what years you were in it to see if maybe you guys had met at a reunion or something.
Yeah, I was in it 72 to 73. So it was Rose Bowl Parade in 73 and the Macy's Parade Thanksgiving 72. Wow, awesome. That was my senior year.
And then the last question, you kind of went over how you settled on the trombone. Mm-hmm. When did you move from trombone to bass trombone?
Okay, again, this is where things sometimes take unexpected turns. I was a tenor trombone player. I got to Indiana. When I was in All Eastern Orchestra, I was assigned the bass trombone part. I was not very happy about it, okay? Who wants to play third trombone? I'd been first chair in All-State. But I liked it, actually. I felt attracted to it. And I also liked the fact that there were 2 first trombone players, 2 second trombone players, and only 1 third trombone player. So I was all by myself. I thought that was kind of cool. But I got to Indiana, and I knew I was transferring to Wheaton even before I started. And I was a music ed major at the time. I didn't switch to performance until I got to into Wheaton. And so it was a very practical decision. Back then, if you were a music ed major, you had to march in the Marching 100, which was like the Marching Zillion of the marching band, for 2 years. And most music ed majors did it freshman and sophomore year, fall semester, to get it out of the way. I knew I didn't have to do that. I wanted to play in an orchestra. And so I asked Mr. Brown, I said, Mr. Brown, I don't know whether I should audition on tenor or bass trombone, but I really want to play in an orchestra. I want to give myself the best shot. And he said, well, very honestly, Doug, we have 53 trombone majors here. He said, we have 12 bass trombone players and the rest are tenor trombone players. We have 5 orchestras and 3 bands, and you do the math. And I figured the odds were better on bass trombone. It was really that simple. Amazing how just an incredibly pragmatic decision like that can change your life. And so don't underestimate the power and impact of seemingly trivial decisions in your life. Because I just said, well, I think, there's 5 orchestras and there's only 12 bass trombone players. It's almost 1 out of 2 chance. Okay, gonna give it a shot. And it was just that simple. And then as soon as I started doing it, oh, I loved it. It just absolutely, it was the right decision. And so what was a very practical, pragmatic decision turned out to be a life-changing decision. And it wasn't until I got to Wheaton College that I actually bought a proper bass trombone. I had a very large bore tenor trombone. It was called the King 1485 model or something. It was a very large bore tenor trombone that had been made for the Cleveland Orchestra. And so it was larger than your average tenor, a little smaller than your average bass. And then I got to work with Mr. Kleinhammer, and I bought my first bass trombone at Giardinelli in New York. And I'll just close with this. When I went to buy that bass trombone, the Chicago Symphony was in New York City for a concert at Carnegie Hall, and I asked Mr. Kleinhammer if he could come to Giardinelli and help me pick an instrument out, and he said, sure. And so I called up the company, Giardinelli, it's a dealer in New York for many years, said, I want you to know I'm coming in on this day. I'd like to try some Bach bass trombones. Yes, of course, we'll have them for you. So pick up Mr. Kleinhammer at his hotel. We walk down to Giardinelli. I come up to the counter and say, I'm Douglas Yeo. I called last week about the bass trombones. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Yeo, we don't have any here. And I was just, what? Then Mr. Kleinhammer stepped up to the counter and said, hello, I'm Edward Kleinhammer of the Chicago Symphony. My student tells me that you were going to have some trombones for him to try. Oh, Mr. Kleinhammer. Oh, well, just a minute. Let me just a minute. Just wait right here. Out came 5 bass trombones. They had been all packed up to be shipped somewhere, but all of a sudden they opened up on the counter. I thought, someday I'd like to be that guy, because he made things happen for a student. And he did. So there you go.
Well, Doug, I appreciate it so very much. To the room, to the students, I just want to say something that strikes me, that's always struck me. And that is that when you take the time to pay attention, like you talked about, and you absorb so much of the musical environment, you do become a singular specialist in excellence at whatever it is that you do. And our society kind of has it turned around in a certain way. We prize specialists from the beginning, which creates narrowness. And in the arts, you're just not going to get there in the arts that way. It's just never going to work. So I hope that's one of your takeaways. And Doug, we have a tradition here. I ask them to turn on their sound, and we applaud, even though it doesn't work, as you well know. So can you guys clap for Doug? Here we go. Yay.
Thank you all. Thank you, Tim, for the opportunity. I just love talking to groups like you. I love being a teacher. I'm really blessed to have had a friend like you, Tim, that cares so much about your students. I'll certainly be keeping all of you in my thoughts and prayers. I know there have been a lot of disappointments in this semester that's concluding, especially the second quad. We're living in a really challenging, unprecedented time. But as I tell my wife every night before we turn off the light, well, we are one day closer to the end of this.
Yeah, for
Not
sure.
just a platitude. We are one day closer. We're learning a lot. Everybody has a story. And when this finishes, and it will finish sometime, when it finishes, there's going to be an amazing accounting by the world about what's going on here, what's been going on. And you are going to tell some of that story. And some of that story is going to be told in music and in every discipline, whatever it is that you're exploring. I look forward to hearing that, because we're in the middle of something that's really something.
Yeah. Just one more thing. It just flitted through my head real quick. We have a really good freshman bass bone player in the group this year. And I just wanted him to come on screen and say hello to you, because he's an admirer. Let's do it, Kevin.
Hello, thanks for talking to us, Professor
Hey,
Yeo.
Kevin. Okay. I didn't know you were, I've seen you on screen all the time here, so I didn't know you were a fellow third trombone player. Good for you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
He can play. He's got some ability, no question. So
Good job. Well, maybe I'll be out at the Dub again sometime in the next few years. There's talk about me coming out to the Brass Band Festival again next February, and we'll see what happens. One thing at a time. We'd like to get to we like to get to Saturday before we get to next year. So,
All right, you
Okay.
guys, everybody, I have some stuff to talk to you about, but I'm going to send it to you. So we'll see you later. Have a great weekend. Thank you, Doug.
thank you. My pleasure. Bye bye now.